In the spring of 1956, a crane swung 58 battered metal boxes onto the deck of an aging oil tanker in Newark, New Jersey. To the men on the pier, it was an unremarkable morning's work. None of them could have known that the rusting ship in front of them would erase more of their jobs than almost any machine in history, and quietly assemble the world we now take for granted. It is the story of the most ordinary object ever made, and how it remade the global economy. To understand why a steel box could matter so much, you first have to understand how strange the old way of moving goods really was. For centuries, loading a ship was a kind of organized chaos. Sacks, barrels, crates and loose bundles carried aboard one piece at a time by gangs of dockhands. A single vessel might lie at its berth for a week or more, simply being filled and emptied by hand. The work had a name, break bulk, and it was by a wide margin the most expensive part of any voyage. Crossing the ocean was cheap. It was the loading and unloading at either end that devoured the profit. And so almost everything carried a hidden surcharge, the cost of the dock itself. The man who would remove that surcharge had never spent a day working on the water, and he never set out to invent anything at all. He did not invent the shipping container. Versions of the box had been tried and forgotten for decades. What he invented was the system around it, and that turned out to be everything. His name was Malcom McLean, a farmer's son from Maxton, North Carolina, who had begun with a single second-hand truck. By the 1950s, the company he built from it was among the largest haulage firms in America. But one problem had lodged itself in his mind and would not leave: waiting. As he told the story in later years, he had once sat for hours at a dock, watching longshoremen carry the contents of his trailer aboard a ship, piece by piece. And a simple question occurred to him. Why unload the trailer at all? Why not lift the whole body, goods and all, straight onto the ship? It seems obvious now. In 1956, it was close to heresy. McLean thought like a haulier, not a sailor. He saw the entire journey as a single chain: truck, port, ship, port, truck. And he understood that the box was useless unless every link in that chain was rebuilt around it. So he did something remarkable for a trucking man. He bought a shipping line. He took an old wartime tanker, strengthened her deck, and renamed her the Ideal X. On the 26th of April 1956, the Ideal X left Newark for Houston, with 58 containers riding on her deck. As she pulled away, a veteran longshoreman is said to have remarked that they ought to sink her. He grasped, more clearly than the executives applauding on the quay, exactly what was coming for the docks. The economics were not a close contest. They belonged to different worlds. Loading cargo the old way cost around $5.83 a ton. McLean's men put the cost of loading the Ideal X at roughly 16 cents. $6 a ton against 16 cents. The same cargo, the same sea, and a cost that had all but collapsed. A week of labour at the berth could now be done in a matter of hours. It should have swept the industry overnight. Instead, for the better part of a decade, the idea very nearly died. Because a brilliant object is worthless until the world is built to receive it. Most ports had no cranes that could lift it. Every shipping line wanted a box of its own dimensions. And the dockworkers' unions saw precisely what McLean saw, that the steel box was coming for their livelihoods. The Avalanche had stalled halfway down the slope. What finally freed it was the least dramatic thing imaginable, an agreement about measurements. Through the late 1960s, a common international standard fixed the box's dimensions so that any container would fit any ship, any crane, any truck, anywhere on Earth. The world had agreed on the shape of a box, and that quiet agreement changed everything. Then came an accelerant no one had planned for: a war. Supplying the war in Vietnam meant moving staggering quantities of cargo across the Pacific. McLean's containers did it smoothly, while the old breakbox system buckled under the strain. But the deeper consequence lay in the journey home. Those ships had to cross the Pacific again, empty. So McLean routed them through Japan and filled the homeward boxes with Japanese goods bound for America. A military supply line had become, almost by accident, a conveyor belt for Asian manufacturing. And once that belt was running, the underlying logic of the world economy quietly inverted. For all of history, distance had been expensive. The box made distance very nearly free. And when shipping costs all but vanish, it stops mattering where a thing is made. So the factories began to move, out of the old industrial cities toward wherever labour was cheapest. The clothes, the furniture, the electronics around you now, almost all of it crossed an ocean in one of these boxes, for a few cents. On the waterfront, the old longshoremen's fear came true. The great labour forces of the docks shrank and shrank again. Storied ports like New York fell quiet as new container terminals rose on cheaper ground across the water. A single steel box had redrawn not only the patterns of trade, but the map of where people worked and lived. Malcom McLean died in 2001. On the morning of his funeral, container ships around the world sounded their horns. He had never tried to hoard the box behind patents. He let the standard spread freely because he understood that the system, not the object, was the point. So look once more at that rusting tanker leaving Newark and the 58 boxes no one thought worth a second glance. The Pebble was a haulier who could not stand to wait at a dock. The Avalanche was globalization itself. Every shelf in every shop you walk into is the far end of that one impatient man's idea. A retired trucker, a plain steel box, and the quiet machinery of the world it rebuilt. Small cause, long consequence.